Indigenous people, the Aitas of Bataan. Here are the topics to be discussed. First is their brief history. This includes the history of Aitas, their characteristics and clothing, and the Aitas of Bataan. Next is their culture. This includes their way of life, traditions, and rites. Lastly, their challenges, or the problems and issues they face. Let us start our discussion from their brief history. The history of Aitas. According to historians, the Aitas, also known as Agtas, are Australo-Melanesians. Historical accounts suggest that they are of the same group as those of origins in Australia and Melanesians in Solomon Islands. While they closely resemble physical characteristics such as curly hair and dark-colored skin, it is still not clear on how they arrived in the Philippines. Historians point to the Bering Land Bridge theory to explain the history of the Aitas. This theory suggests that Aitas reached the Philippines because of the land bridges or narrow strait that connected all land masses in the world. According to this theory, hunters at that time crossed these land bridges, but due to the movement of plates underneath the Earth's surface, these migration paths eventually disappeared. Therefore, even those with no intent to colonize new lands were unable to return to their original homes. Next is their distinguishing characteristics and clothing. Aitas are characterized by their skin color, height, and hair type. They mostly have dark to dark brown skin, curly hair, and are usually below 5 feet tall. As for their clothing, they wear plain and simple attire. Traditional Aitas, who are skilled in weaving and plaiting, wear wrap-around skirts or bark cloth for women and loincloth for men. Now let us proceed to the discussion of the Aitas of Bataan. Aitas can be found in Bataan. There are small Aitas settlements in almost all of the municipalities in Dinalupihan, Hermosa, Orani, Samal, Abukay, Balanga, Orion, Limay, Mariveles, Bagak, and Morong. The Aitas living in the Philippines, most specifically Aita Magbukun, was the least known and still undocumented tribes. We all know that Aitas can be found living in the mountains. There are many populations and groups of Aitas living in Bataan, but we are going to focus about the Aitas in Mariveles or the Aita Magbukun of Bataan. A single indigenous group known as the Aita Magbukun can be found living near the fringe of the Manila Bay or South China Sea and the forest cover of Mount Mariveles in the Philippines. Mariveles is composed of 18 barangays at ang mga Aita ay matatagpuan sa mga mainly undeveloped mountains ng Mariveles. Their village where they belong has been recently constructed by the NGO. Barangay Biyan is where we can find Aita Magbukun. Their barangay has the smallest population since ang mga Aita lang ang nakatira doon, yet one of the largest in terms of lands. The indigenous Aita Magbukun maintain a primarily nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyle in their forest ancestral lands. Since Aita still suffering from poverty, discrimination, and still enduring dispossession, we barely see them joining crowds. We all know na mga Aita ay matatagpuan talaga sa bundok at ang kanilang pangunahing hanap buhay ay mga aso, magtanim at magkain. The Magbukun tribe has maintained their hunter-gatherer lifestyle not until some law prohibited them. According to the law, the Aita were prohibited from roaming the forest to hunt and gather food. Napilitan silang i-adapt ang agricultural production methods and some way of living sa community na kinabibilangan nila. Such enforced local community exclusion from ancestral lands has enabled officials to engage in clandestine resource extraction by external operators in protected lands. Due to the increase of economic activity, kagaya na lang ng upgraded road and renamed to become the Mariveles-Bagak Highway led to their bayan-bayanan, brought the fear of the Aitas to lose their own identity, culture, language, and yung takot na baka pati ang kanilang hanap buhay ay mawala dahil sa pagiging open ng kanilang bayan sa public. According to some research, the two first Eta, Apo Alipon and Lola Moray, originally from Zambales in the north, settled in Morong, an area now called Barangay Mabayo, make an oath to the Anitos or the spirits, and Apo na Malyari, the creator being, that they will live peacefully with each other and care for their land, and that explains why ganun na lang nila ipaglaban ang karapatan nila sa kanilang ancestral land. To sum it all up, hindi naging madali ang buhay ng mga eight. Discrimination, poverty, lack of education, but despite all of that, they have a strong sense of personality, self-identity, and are committed to self-determination for the betterment of their people, culture, and unique way of life. They also suffer sa kamay ng mga kapwa Pilipino rin dahil sa pagpapatayo ng mga villages na naging dahilan ng pagkawala ng karapatan nila to inhabit their ancestral forest domain. Natutunan nila makihalubilo to survive and provide for their basic needs.
The culture of Aitas. The Aitas way of life. Negritos is a term used to describe a group of people distinct from other Filipinos. The Aitas inhabited the valleys, knolls, and dense rainforests, living independently by wildlife and cultivating land using a slash-and-burn technique. Aitas family openly intermarry, resulting in nearly all tribe members being connected in some way and sharing the same surname.
The Aitas way of life. The Aitas are part of the Philippines Aboriginal population. Negritos is a term used to describe a group of people. They are distinct from other Filipinos. Curly, dark complexion, and short stature are characteristic by indigenous group. The Aitas inhabited the valleys, knolls, and dense rainforests, living independently by wildlife and cultivating land using a slash-and-burn technique. The Aitas faced hunger and suffering because they were unable to practice their slash-and-burn technique farming method for fear of being discovered and caught. The extended family is vital to the Aitas' lives. Aita families openly intermarry, resulting in nearly all tribe members being connected in some way and sharing the same surname. As a result, community members are closely connected and supportive of one another. The lowland Tagalogs have affected the majority of traditional Aita culture. The Aita's ability to accept the change, carefully cherishing some aspect of their culture while rejecting others, has been affected in great part by their contract with Tagalog unattended children, meaning straight-haired, in contrast to the Aitas who are called kulot or curly-haired.
Tradition. The Aitas eat mostly from the forest because they are hunters and gatherers. They eat a lot of forest food, whether it's cooked, boiled, or raw. The majority of their produce is sold at a local cooperative market. Because there is no source of irrigation, the abundance of food is necessary for proper rain and careful protection from rats.
Tradition. Aitas traditionally practice slash-and-burn agriculture, kaingin or gasak. Root crops, primarily sweet potatoes or kamote, bananas, and a variety of food make up the majority of the supply. Rice isn't widely planted, thus it frequently purchased to augment their limited supplies. Once the rains arrive in May, cultivation begins. The harvesting of vegetables need 4 to 5 months and the harvest of rice need 4 months. Because there is no source of irrigation, the abundance of food is necessary for proper rain and careful protection from rats, as well as other wild creatures. Lowlanders have been able to produce and harvest up to 3 rice crops every year, thanks to improved tools, rice stock, and field management. The Aitas are lucky if they get one harvest yearly.
Hunting and gathering. The Aitas used to be quite resourceful in their environment. Prior to their migration, they would obtain their food via hunting, fishing, gathering, or scavenging. Hunters go hunting for food, money, and to improve their hunting skills. Food was never hard to locate in their highland, says one Aita.
Hunting and gathering. Hunting necessitates a wide range of abilities, yet there is no guarantee of what the forest will provide. Hunters go hunting for food, money, and to improve their hunting skills. It is also a way of life of them. Aitas used to be quite resourceful in their environment. Prior to their migration, they would obtain their food via hunting, fishing, gathering, or scavenging, all of which are abundant in their area. The Aitas' primary food gathering approach was to use a variety of methods and strategies to obtain their food. They might utilize the antojo and biste methods for fishing, or the mamala method, in which the Aitas erected dams by depositing large stone in the stream, forcing the stream to branch out and making fishing easier. They utilize different types of arrow for different species when hunting for bird game. They also would look for wild roots, vegetable, bananas, beetles, wild pigs, and even bats, which had become their primary food supply. Food was never hard to locate in their highland, says one Aita.
Practice and beliefs. The Aita tribes believe in a supreme deity who is in charge of lesser spirits or gods. They hail Apo na Malyari, the creator who is said to live on the summit of Mount Pinatubo in Zambales. The Aitas are also animists who believe in environmental spirit known as Anito and Kamana.
Practice and beliefs. The Aita tribes believe in a supreme deity who is in charge of lesser spirits or gods. They hail Apo na Malyari, the creator who is said to live on the summit of Mount Pinatubo in Zambales. The Aitas are also animists who believe in environmental spirit known as Anito and Kamana. They think that the spirit is in the nature such as the sky, river, sea, mountain, and so on. The Aitas think that disease is usually caused by demonic spirits as a consequence for misbehavior. The ultimate Anito is said to cause the more serious disease, while the lesser Anitos are thought to cause the less powerful ones. Bad spirits, such as the Laminlin Lota, are considered to possess or enter the human body and cause illness. The Aitas still execute a spirit recovery practice known as Kagon, which includes dancing, song and guitar music to evict the demonyo from the depressed patient.
Aitas traditions. Most Aitas practice monotheism and are animists. They worship a supreme being and at the same time also believe in environmental spirits. They believe that various places in our environment are being governed by both good and evil spirits. As for their clothing, they wear plain and simple attire. Aitas are skillful in weaving and plaiting. The Aitas are skillful in weaving and plaiting. Women exclusively weave winos and mats. Only men make armlets. They also produce raincoats made of palm leaves whose base surrounds the neck of the wearer, and whose topmost part spreads like a fan all around the body. Wedding ceremony traditions. In the wedding ceremony, the couple eats from the same plate and they take turns feeding each other. Although monogamy is the rule in the Aitas culture, a man is allowed to have more than one wife if he can accumulate enough bandi or bride price.
Rights. The Aitas expect the government to guarantee their basic rights, specifically on the right to food, shelter, education, health, job opportunities, and suffrage, among others. It is recommended that government be more responsive in guaranteeing the rights of the Aitas through effective measures. Indigenous people face many challenges and their human rights are frequently violated. They are denied control over their own development based on their own values, needs, and priorities. They are politically underrepresented and lack access to social and other services. In the Philippines, indigenous peoples have traditionally felt the brunt of pervasive social discrimination and subsequently live in the most undeveloped and agriculturally marginal lands. Indigenous peoples have been subject to historical discrimination and marginalization from political processes and economic benefits. The Aita continue to endure dispossession, poverty, and political discrimination through decades of protracted land rights processes. They often face exclusions, loss of ancestral lands, displacement, pressures, and destructions of traditional ways of life and practices, and loss of identity and culture. Republic Law 8371. known as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act or IPRA, was enacted in 1997. It has been praised for its support for the cultural integrity of indigenous peoples, the right to their lands, and the right to self-directed development of these lands. An act to recognize, protect, and promote the rights of indigenous people, creating a national commission on indigenous peoples, establishing implementing mechanism, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes. In sum, IPRA is one of the world's most advanced law when it comes to the rights of indigenous people. It clearly states that lands and forests that they have traditionally used for their existence, as well as the resources under them, belong to these communities. Article 12, Section 5 states that we should protect the rights of indigenous cultural communities to their ancestral lands to ensure their economic, social, and cultural well-being, and shall recognize the applicability of customary laws governing property rights or relations in determining the ownership and extent of ancestral domain. The indigenous concept of ownership generally holds that ancestral domains are the indigenous people's private but community property which belongs to all generations and therefore cannot be sold, disposed, or destroyed. It likewise covers sustainable traditional resource rights. Article 14, Section 17 says that the state should recognize, respect, and protect the rights of indigenous cultural communities to preserve and develop their cultures, traditions, and institutions. The indigenous people should have the right to determine and decide their own priorities for development affecting their lives, beliefs, institutions, spiritual well-being, and lands they own, occupy, or use. They shall participate in the formulation, implementation, and evaluation of policies, plans, and programs for national, regional, and local development which may affect them directly. Now, let us proceed to the issues and problems faced by the Aitas. Aitas are one of the indigenous groups thriving in the country. They face challenges such as displacement, marginalization, and poverty. Over the years, the majority of Aitas population managed to keep their cultural practices and traditions. But sadly, as one of the indigenous people thriving in the country, they also face challenges such as displacement, marginalization, and poverty. In the Philippines, Aitas, as well as other indigenous people, belong to the marginalized sector of the country. They are often displaced because their homelands have been destroyed due to damages caused by illegal logging, mining, and slash-and-burn farming. That is why these situations have forced the Aitas to relocate or find places to be their new home and leave their ancestral lands. While the Philippine government has implemented mandates and acts such as the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997, wherein it is an act to recognize, protect, and promote the rights of indigenous cultural communities or indigenous people, creating a national commission on indigenous people, establishing implementing mechanisms, appropriating funds, and for other purposes. It is not enough to protect them and help them cope with matters such as access to jobs and livelihood support. That is why poverty is still one of the problems that these indigenous people face. The government of the Philippines had displaced the Aita in 128,000 hectares of uninhabitable land. known as Ancestral Domain, at the foot of Mount Pinatubo. These areas are very remote and far away from the city. There is no infrastructure such as water systems, and they are not provided with the necessary tools for survival. However, the Aita tribe is resilient and have occupied private lands and metropolitan cities as beggars, which had become their cultural norm. The Aitas lived under bridges and spent their lives breathing polluted air and drinking from polluted rivers. Without outside intervention, they are trapped and do not have a way out of their situation. The Aita people today are the first generation to experience extreme poverty. Indigenous people suffer higher rates of poverty, homelessness, and malnutrition. They have low levels of literacy and less access to health services, further contributing to their poverty.
Ethnic discrimination. Aita are the first generation to grow up in terrible poverty. Many Aita are still unemployed and do not have enough money to purchase basic essentials like food, clothes, and water. We should aim for equal treatment since it helps everyone feel better about themselves and the society they live in.
Ang mga Aita ngayon ay ang first generation na nakaka-experience na matinding kahirapan. Marami pa ring mga Aita ang pinagkakaitan ng trabaho. Kaya naman nabubuhay sila sa kahirapan dahil ito sa diskriminasyon na kanilang nararanasan sa buhay. Sila ay tinitignan bilang isang mababang uri ng tao at nahaharap sila sa hindi patas na tingin mula sa gobyerno. Kaya naman walang sapat na pera ang mga ito para makabili ng basic necessities katulad na lamang ng pagkain, damit at tubig. Ang pantay na pagtrato ay isang bagay na dapat nating pagsumikapan dahil ito ay nagpapagaan ng pakiramdam ng lahat tungkol sa kanilang sarili at sa lupaing kanilang ginagalawan.
Scarcity of livelihood opportunities. The Aita rely entirely on forest goods for a living, yet forest covering is steadily reducing. Introduction of illegal loggers into the forest has harmed their hunting supplies. As a result, the neighborhood has fewer options for earning a living.
Ang mga Aita ay umaasa lamang sa produkto ng kagubatan para sa kanilang kabuhayan. Ang pagtaas ng populasyon at ang kasunod ng paglawak ng mga gawaing pang-agrikultura ay humantong sa pagbawas ng lugar ng kagubatan at naapektuhan nito ang mga tradisyonal na gawain ng mga Aita sa kabuhayan. Tulad ng pangangaso, pangangalap, pagkolekta ng pulot at iba pa. Dagdag pa ang pagpasok ng mga iligal na magtotroso sa kagubatan ay nakaapekto rin sa kanilang mga pinagkukunan sa pangangaso habang ang kanilang tradisyonal na kaugalian na shifting cultivation o kaingin ay hindi na umiral dahil sa pagtaas ng pressure ng population. Nagbunga ito ng kawalan ng mga oportunidad sa kabuhayan para sa komunidad.
And lastly, the conclusion. And to conclude this all, we would like to share to you a quote from White Elk. Treat all men alike, give them all an even chance to live and grow.
The indigenous Ita are the disciples of our nature, and they are the instruments why we still preserve our natural resources that helps our daily living and also our nature. They have simple lifestyle and they are the image of true Filipinos. So they are admired until now because they still maintain their culture despite of various inventions and modernization. Masasabing nakakahanga naman talaga ang ating mga katutubong Ita at kapupulutan ito ng inspirasyon dahil sa pagiging masipag, matyaga, may paninindigan at tiwala sa sarili, nagsusumikap sa buhay, matipid at madiskarte. Sila ang mga taong kahit kailanman hindi mo maririnig na magrereklamo dahil lang sa estado o kalagayan ng kanilang buhay. Dahil kontento na sila sa kung ano man ang meron sa kanila. Basta't namumuhay sila na mapayapa at walang nanggugulo sa kanilang baryo. Sapat na hanggat may pinagkukunan sila ng kanilang mga kagamitan, pagkain at mga bagay na kinakailangan nila. Sa makatuwid, maipagmamalaki natin ang mga katutubong ita dahil sa malaking naiambag ng mga ito sa ating lipunan na hanggang ngayon ay napapakinabangan ng mga bagong henerasyon, kaya't napakahalaga ng mga ito sa ating lipunan. Bukod pa doon, dahil sa mga katutubong ito, natuklasan natin kung paano magkaroon ng easy way of living na hindi kailangan ng makabagong teknolohiya at modernisasyon sa kasalukuyan dahil ipinamalas nila ang simple way of living na sipag at tiyaga lang ang puhunan para umunlad ang kanilang pamumuhay. Sila ay nagpamalas ng galing, diskarte, sipag, pagkakaisa at may prinsipyo na walang kasarinlan at may positibong aspeto ng kultura para sa ikauunlad ng pamayanan at hindi lamang sa pansariling interes lamang. Gayunpaman, sa likod ng kahirapan na dinaranas nila, hindi pa rin nila nakakalimutang umiti, maging masaya, makontento, i-enjoy ang buhay, magpasalamat at laging manalig sa kataas-taasan. Sila ang dapat natin tangkilikin at bigyang pagpapahalaga sa mga kulturang ipinamalas nila dahil sila ang magandang huwaran bilang isang mamamayang Pilipino.